Grab your pre-workout and turn up that volume. It is time for a new episode of the Powerlifter's Den with your host, Cam Smith. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Powerlifter's Den. I'm your host, Cam Smith, and today I wanted to bring on Leroy, a very talented bench presser as well as arm wrestler and strict curl guy. Leroy, why don't you introduce yourself?
How you guys doing? My name is Leroy the Machine Walker. As the gracious host stated, I'm known for bench press and recently have crossed over into strict curl and arm wrestling. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah, so I guess we can get started maybe talking about some of the early days. I took a little check at Open Powerlifting 4, and I see that you've been competing in bench press competitions for actually longer than I've been alive. So maybe talk about what kind of got you into that and maybe a little bit about your transition into what you're doing now.
Okay. Yeah, I started early on. I started just lifting weights with my uncle in the gym. I started with the easy curl bar when I was 13 years old and just kept progressing through high school with football and wrestling. After, high school transition over to college, the weightlifting stayed, pretty relevant. And then after college football, just still had that need to want to compete. So, stuck with powerlifting and then just kind of really just stayed with the bench press. High school, I had really good coaches, people who knew how to spot and wrap knees and all that stuff. I just didn't feel I was going to have the same level of coaching and the same level after college that I did in high school, and I'm 46. So when I was coming up, powerlifting, it was known, but there wasn't as many coaches and it wasn't as prevalent or as it is today. So if you didn't really have a really good high school or football, college program to stick with, it was kind of like far and few between. The bench press was easy to progress, commercial gym, as long as you have kind of spotters, you're kind of good to go. So I, just started entering some amateur or, non-sanctioned meets and just kind of wanted to make a run for 600. And that's kind of where it all got started.
Yeah. So where did you play college football out of?
I played at a smaller T3 school in Southern California, Whittier. Great experience, liberal arts school. Education was the main priority. I knew I wasn't going to go to the NFL. Great experience, wouldn't trade it for the world. And, decent weightlifting program there. And just fell in love. And, being in Southern California versus Washington State, it was easy to find, powerlifting meets. The USPA wasn't quite the USPA. You still kind of had AAU and you had, USA lifting and stuff. And just started to grow with the sport.
Yeah. I played D3 up here in Massachusetts. So you got to show love for the D3.
Yeah.
So, I guess kind of going more into some of the competitions, when was like your first bench press competition and what did you hit?
I think I want to say the first sanctioned one, I think I hit like a I don't know if you have it in front of you. I think I hit like a 484 or something around there raw. I think it was like 18, 19 years old. First 500 was a touch and go. It was non-sanctioned. That's when I was 19. And then hit some more non-sanctioned. I think my first 600, non-sanctioned was a touch and go at Venice Beach. And Venice Beach, it was different because at the time it was like touch and go. It wasn't really, frowned upon to do touch and go. CT Fletcher had, a Venice Beach record. So it was just kind of fun, kind of the thing to do. And I knew I wanted to be legitimate. I wanted to have legit records. So as I started to learn and, compete at Venice Beach, it got kind of, I know it's going to sound cocky, it got kind of boring to win. You show up, you bench over 600 pounds, you win. You show up, you bench over 600 pounds. And at that time, it was kind of like up and coming to where you're only going to get recognition if you did it sanctioned with a pause. So it was easy to kind of bow out of the amateur ranks and the touch and go stuff and then see if it transitioned. Because a lot of people were skeptical if it would transition, touch. And I even thought at the time, it didn't bother me because I did pauses in the gym. It wasn't that I was scared or nervous about sanctioned meets. There wasn't any around
Yeah.
that, to compete in at the time.
Yeah, and I feel like nowadays too, like even when you're more technically proficient, like me personally, like I feel like I'm even better with a pause because I can keep that tightness. Like you see obviously like the gym lifts and a lot of things like doing the touch and go, but I think it obviously practice how you play, but being like with the experience, I feel like you get more out of being able to actually pause it and keep the tightness.
Yeah, you do. I mean, I'm kind of I don't want to say a different breed. I just have I have a lot of love for all side of it. I respect the technical side of it. I don't necessarily coach that way, and I'm not a huge like. I think there's a big division. I mean, there's so many different federations, but for the most part, we could agree that there's what I call the USAPO kids, and then there's that kind of like the WRP or the USPA. And so with that being said, I'm more of a fan of, and I say this all the time, I'm a big fan of it's easier to teach a cheetah how to turn than it is elephant how to run fast. I'm all about touch and go. I'm about overload. I'm about, nest form isn't necessarily everything. And when you're in your off season or your building phase, and what I mean by the teach a cheetah how to run, I'd rather get someone that can be, 500-600 pounds touch and go, and then learn how to teach them on the pause.
Yeah.
Because I see too many other people. They're so um just want to be technicians, and their progress is super super slow. So they're technically sound, they have the arch, they have everything that looks great as far as how a bench press should look technical. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you're not setting records, then what are you really doing? Are you showing up for participation awards? Are you the biggest fish in that pond, because you haven't competed on a bigger stage? So but I mean, at the end of the day, to each their own. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's actually a great point because there's a certain point in your lifting career when like the form will get you into a certain point, but at the end of the day, you just need to get fucking stronger.
Yeah, and there is a big division. I see. I've always been around the narrative of drug free, non tested. And when I was up and coming, being 46, I'd say back in the day, power was power. So it wasn't really drug free versus non drug free. It was like shirted versus raw. Because up and coming, if you weren't, and maybe this is gonna, tell my age a little bit, if you weren't part of like Team USA or Titan or Inzer, you weren't getting no pub, you weren't in powerlifting, USA, any of those magazines, but that's because you weren't one of their lifters. So when I came up, nobody really talked. I mean, because it's kind of unspoken. As you got in, you understood why certain people are super strong. But are they super strong raw, or were they super strong, shirted? It wasn't really gear versus non-gear per se, as much as you kind. But I think it's kind of dying down because I think people have kind of accepted like, hey, if you want to be the best against the best, then you're going to go to a meet that's probably non-tested.
Yeah.
Versus if you want to play in that sand lot, I think everyone should has their own sand lot, but it's to each their own. And I'm not a fan of guys who are not clean and they lift to those federations. But at the end of the day, it's like I recognize the guys who have the biggest lifts. If you want to be non-tested or tested, and that's fine, but I don't think you're going to get the recognition that some of the other major powerlifters do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing with being on drugs versus being drug free is just the honesty about it. Like, especially in the world of powerlifting and bodybuilding, like we know it's there, and there's a lot of people that take it. So, like, being honest is definitely, I think, to me, the integrity of it's way more important than the actual use of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess kind of transitioning into maybe what made you kind of stop doing the bench press competitions, get into strict curl and arm wrestling.
I think, a big part of it was, to be honest with you, there's a couple of factors I credit. I've never really sat down and had this conversation, but Julius, as Julius was up and coming, I always kept my eye on him, and I'm not a hope and dreamer. I'm a realist. So the closest I got to 705 attempts and barely missed. I want to say at the American Cup, I ended, I think, like a USPA record, like USA record at heavyweight. It was like 661. And then I was real naive at the time. I didn't know that I could chip the record to go for 7, because it was either, if you look at the board, it's either 699 or 705.
Yeah.
So nobody wants to be the 699 guy. So if I could do it over, I think I would have made the 700, but I took the shot at 705 and missed. And as you know, trying to get back to that level, I had a couple, not severe, but just injuries that set me back. I think the highest in competition I ever got back to after shoulder injury was 650 raw, which is still, I mean, it's in the world of powerlifting, it's still an unbelievable number. But
Yeah.
with Julius up and coming and, guys like TD, it was really easy for me to kind of see the writing on the wall. I don't like to compete for, second or third. And I knew that Julius was going to put the bench in the stratosphere. And it was hard enough to get to 700 raw without injury. So I was like, approaching mid to late 30s. There's so many people up and coming. So I said, 650 as a master's, it was just kind of time to move on. And then the other part of it that I'll be more open about now is the transitioning from just being older and being a super heavyweight. You don't see a lot of like super heavyweight plus guys in their mid 40s 50s walking around healthy, or you see people kind of pass off. So as a point of those last couple weeks of contest prep, just feeling super heavy, lethargic, just the pee. It just made it was just becoming unbearable,
Yeah.
And I was like, is it really worth it to try to compete at this level? So I knew I needed to lose weight, and that's been kind of the focus, transitioning from powerlifting or from bench press to strict curl. And then same thing with the arm wrestling. The two kind of go hand in hand. They're both, I could compete at a high level at a calorie deficit,
Yeah.
Lose weight, still be competitive, but just have longevity in a different sport. It was just time to kind of, transition.
Yeah. So, kind of, we'll continue a little bit on about benches. Maybe throughout the years, what are some of your like favorite, I guess, bench builders?
I'm a huge fan of first and foremost volume. I think enough isn't said about the Bulgarian method, um, and I think it's just a tremendous way to go. So my builders are just keep it simple, keep bench the main thing. Um, I fell in love with incline because at the time, and I'm looking back at it now, at the time, commercial gyms have really narrow benches. And being a bigger guy, and till later in my career, we didn't have the Thompson fat pad, so it was a lot of wear and tear unnecessarily on the shoulders. So that's a big part of why I transitioned and did so much of my training on incline, because you didn't have the same amount of wear and tear on your front delts. It gave me a lot more longevity. I was able to do the volume, and I was able to keep increasing at a high level. So incline was probably my primary, but it's like I said, because I didn't have a fat pad to work out on in the earlier half of my career. One of my favorite go-tos is also some people call it Larson. I put my feet all the way up because I wanted to always build on tricep, and I was a big close grip guy. Traditional close grip, like right here close grip, not out here narrow, calling it close grip. Yeah, so I'd have to say incline, feet up, ISO, and close grip were probably my three primary lifts when it came to making the bench better.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I mean, I've had some shoulder issues, but I feel like incline is pretty hit or miss for people. I feel like same with like even overhead press. Like sometimes it does translate like significantly, and other times they don't really get much out of it. So, what kind of made you realize that you were getting a lot of your incline training?
Just because so much volume, I didn't really have the shoulder. And to me, I don't know if it was superstition. I wasn't a real big fan of doing 3x3s or 3x1s or whatever. So I wasn't really big on ever taking a max in the gym. Like, I'll be honest, and looking back at my career, I think 650 is the only thing that I really probably hit a lot paused in the gym and then it transitioned. But when I hit 675 in Detroit at Relentless, I think the heaviest I took on a flat attempt was like 622. I took a 650 touch and go when on the same training cycle when I went for the 700. So superstition, I was just never a big one rep flat bench kind of guy during training. I always wanted to kind of hit, doubles and triples or, heavy singles on incline, knowing that if I get it, like I hit a 655 on incline, I knew it was going to transition to a great flat bench. So that was kind of I've always had what I would consider indicator lifts. something that's extremely harder than what it would be in competition. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, for me, incline's a very humbling lift, so definitely something that got incorporated into my off season a little bit and made me realize just how much work, especially my front delts, needed. Like the transition, because that transition point is where my sticking point is. So I think
Yeah.
incorporating the incline definitely be something to look into. Um, so more onto the incline bench. I know there's a few videos out there on the internet that kind of went viral, like the backflip and like the 605 pause. So maybe talk a little bit about what kind of made you do that and kind of what the, I guess not the repercussions, but the impact of that was for you.
I think I don't know. I kind of like the shock and awe. I didn't, like I was never a big fan of social media. I got late into like 2014, 15 is when I first started getting on Instagram. I came late to it because I was just like, I don't see the point. But I did end up falling in love with Instagram versus YouTube. I hated YouTube because YouTube, and still to this kind of day, I kind of feel the same way. You have to have extreme when you compete or do stuff at a high level. You have to have thick skin because nobody's personally vested in a social platform like YouTube because you can just go on, watch the video, leave your 2 cents, and kind of want to talk shit or whatever. Versus like IG, for example, they have to kind of somewhat like you. There's a little bit of a loyalty factor because they have to follow you. You still get your trolls, but it's not the same as a platform where people don't have to be invested in you necessarily to consume your content and then just leave a like whatever remark. So I kind of gravitated more towards IG, but I also found I didn't like I didn't like making just very vanilla content. I wanted to make a splash. I want to be different, and I had more off season or more downtime than I did actual. Like, I mean, you're only doing contest prep for 10 weeks, so contest prep. I mean, you would want to show your PRs and stuff like that, but it got really kind of boring. So that's where kind of the gym fuckery, and then it kind of became this thing because at the time you had it was a real fun dynamic, and I always like to talk about the story. A guy I look up to, and although we never really, I don't want to say we didn't get along, but just our styles. Like Jeremy Hoonstra was a very, and still is to this day, he's very cut and dry. He's going to show you exactly what you should do for X, Y, and Z. He's going to show his training. Not a lot of flair to it, and that's fine. That's his style. I respect him for it. But I remember we kind of have a couple differences in opinion, like because there's also the people who train and show that stuff. They really don't care for the gym fuckery type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I get more because also at the time you had guys like you had Brown Castleberry, you had the Hulk. So you had these people who were aesthetically pleasing and doing all this tremendous stuff, but they'd always kind of leave the question mark, does it transition to the platform? Because you never see those guys compete.
Yeah.
And then the guys that compete I see a lot of those guys are frustrated because they weren't getting the views. And so I knew I was always going to compete. So that's why I didn't mind kind of trolling the audience with like, can he do it? Because I knew it was going to transition. And that was kind of a motivating factor. I'm like, man, if I hit this fucking touch and go 650 on the incline, I better stick it in, competition or people are going to think it's fraudulent. So I kind of had fun trolling both sides because the true technicians would think I was just a gym fuckery guy. The gym fuckery people would think that it would never transition to, the platform. So I kind of had fun making content that would appease both sides. And at the end of the day, I thought I would always have the final say because anything I ever hit in the gym, I always hit on the platform. And not a lot of people could say that when they were like early content makers.
Yeah, and I feel like being able to kind of balance it, like have fun and like get the videos out, but if it's not really affecting your training, especially during like a meet prep, then why not like have fun with your training? At the end of the day, this is a hobby for everyone. So
yeah, and it was easy because I was kind of and I say this too, I was my own coach. So I respect the hell out of the guys, like I said, the Hoonstras, the TDs, the Julius, because they work hand in hand with Josh Bryant, who's a tremendous coach. I can never not say enough stuff about Josh Bryant. However, I have the leniency of being in control of also the social media and programming side. So I didn't necessarily have someone to answer. Other times I wish I had a more structured program or coach someone that can say, hey, here's your sets and reps and go do this. Oh, by all means, because the results speak for themselves and what that man's been able to do for, so many great bench pressers. But if I look back, I'm still happy with the outcome.
Yeah. So I guess kind of a little bit into coaching. I know that you do some coaching now. What exactly do you do for coaching? Is it like strictly for what you do now, or is it kind of overall encompassing? Or tell us about that.
It's kind of overall. I try to gravitate, and I'll do intake calls with people. I really like to push. I really like to work with elites because the mindset's there.
Yeah.
It's not no so much necessarily the monetary part of it, although it is nice to be able to monetize what you're passionate about. But I think it's just kind of, and we're stuck in this era where the old school people say the new generation's too soft, and the new generation says, well, that's why the older generation has a lot of setbacks and injuries. So I see the point and the criticisms on both sides of it. But me, I'm a big mindset person. I think the newer generation is a little bit softer, and knowing my coaching style and knowing I knew what it take to get to what it took to get to a high level, I kind of instill that upon the people I work with. So I'll tell athletes, hey, I'm not for everybody. I don't care about your excuses. I'm result driven.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, primarily elite people who want to be elite bench pressers. And then the strict curl is not necessarily elite, but I like to take people who just have a passion and want to become better at the sport. And I just come at it with, it's crazy because I use the same approach and the same methodology that worked for me in bench press. But in the strict curl world, it's almost like they have, and you can probably relate to this, like this USAPL mindset where everything has to be very precise, very, strict. I mean, hence the word strict curl. So when I came into the sport, I saw these people training strict, and I was like, well, the biceps aren't that hard to train, but if you really want them to grow and get powerful, you got to understand it's more of a compound movement than it is an iso movement. And I see all these people doing isolated work, and they're not getting the overload or the amount of volume. So I said, let me toy around with this because I was new to it. I was like, I have nothing to lose. And so I did, and then I was able to have a lot of success. So I felt that there was more. If you treat it like a traditional lift, and the fact that you need overload, you need compound movements, and then you can work on the precision or the skill after you develop the power, you'll have a lot of success. And I've continued to have success with the people I've worked with. So it's kind of reinforced that it wasn't just a one-off of me being super strong coming into a sport. It was literally starting, because when you go into strict curl, there is no template. You've seen, Saplankov, you've seen, CT, the Godfather, kind of do the sport. But even those guys never really left a template or a blueprint of, hey, this is what you do. I saw and knew Dennis was a great arm wrestler. I knew he had a lot of the Russian methodology going on. And then, you see the same things that everyone sees from CT is like, hey, I'm going to do curls every motherfucking day until I have some big ass arms. So I kind of said, well, there's something to both of those, and I've applied it with bench press and it works. So I said, hey, let's just try this and strict curl and kind of see what happens.
Yeah. So with going into the strict curl and like arm wrestling world, did you kind of join those two worlds simultaneously?
The strict curl world was really just to be competitive. And like looking back at it now, like people say, how did that come evolve? It came kind of out of necessity, because I was at a point where I was still passionate about lifting. I had some success with some different companies and stuff as far as helping develop wraps and whatnot. So there was still a need for me to be relevant, although I knew I was going to be on a decline in the bench world. So that's kind of where I was at a crossroads, and that's kind of where I exited working with one company, and then Ghost was coming on the scene. So the strict curl kind of became a necessity because I wasn't going to be able to be as relevant to benching. So strict curl is kind of this new thing, and I just recently signed a sweetheart of a deal contract with Ghost as an athlete. So I was like thinking to myself, I better find a fucking way to be competitive and relevant. So I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go on this crusade and try to rewrite the strict curl world record. And I wanted to start with the American record. And I was also with Ghost developing, the wrist straps, the reapers, the crushers, whatnot, which became a success. And I was proud of that. And then so I was also able to transition and parlay that part of it and become relevant still, or maintain being relevant by advancing in strict curl. So I'm thankful to this day that Ghost took a shot on me, developing the wraps, developing a strict curl platform, which had never been done. And it all kind of worked out. Unfortunately, for different reasons, Ghost kind of moved on from powerlifting, but I think they left a lasting impression on a lot of people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, I had Brandon Allen on last week, and we were kind of talking about the same thing about just like that drive to compete still, even when you're in the, I guess, like the decline of competing in powerlifting. It still lets you compete in that strength sport, but have a maintain of healthy. And like you said before, like you can still be in a caloric deficit and still compete.
Yeah, I would say that's spot on. And I've talked to Brandon. I mean, me and Brandon are friends. There's a lot of it's almost like the similarities of the training and the reason. It's like you see Larry, you see Brandon, you see other people trans. To me, it's not. Let me say this. It's not easy, but if you have the mindset that it took to become a champion, like Larry and Brandon did, then you need that determination, because I would say out of everything I've done, arm wrestling is by far the hardest. But you can apply, because something's kind of lacking, and it's not necessarily going to be the end all be all, but arm wrestlers don't have the same kind of knowledge and discipline that the power lifters do.
Hmm.
They just have levels and levels of experience and tendon and joint strength where it counts. So I feel that that's not easy to learn, but it's not hard to learn and then transition to power, because once you develop the tenacity with the tendons and ligaments, it makes it so you're going to be a more formative opponent. But there's about a 3 to 4 year gap that you're going to be not at a top level. But that's why you're starting to see Brandon start to break through and climb the ranks. Larry's been at it 4+ years, and now he's just night and day from where he started. So I feel I have the strength, I have the mindset. Now it's just a matter of paying my dues and getting past those kind of bumps and bruises. So the arm wrestling kind of came after, because as I started advancing the sure curl world, you start seeing arm wrestlers kind of like hit me up or ask me about this or that or make videos. And so that's kind of how I discovered, Michael Todd. And then he invited me up to his place to do a collab, with me being recently, a lot of accolades were coming in shirt curl. He, at the time, when, was one of the most dominant arm wrestlers of all time. So we made the collab, and I just kind of fell in love with it. And I understood, although arm wrestling has a lot of similarities to shirt curl training, shirt curl training has a lot of similarities to arm wrestling, it was super hard to train both at a high level. So as right now, as I'm transitioning to kind of make another run for some shirt curl stuff, I still arm wrestle, but it's not at the forefront of my training like it has been for kind of the past years. I've kind of been leveling up.
Yeah. So I guess what does the training kind of look like for both arm wrestling and trick
Um, I think the best part, like with anything, I think your template or your programming has to be really around. I don't want to say time management, because that's kind of just a given. I would say it's more about recovery. Arm wrestling is definitely going to be more table time and less gym time. And then when I train for shirt curl, I'll dabble in arm wrestling, but it's all about the recovery time, because arm wrestling takes so much longer for your joints, for your tendons and ligaments to recover than it does from just shirt curl training. So right now, it's been in moderation. I'll probably pull competitively, or like when I say competitive, like a hardcore practice pull, like maybe once every week or maybe once every 2 weeks. But that's really because I've been in prep for strict curl. But a lot of the same movements. A lot of time under tension, a lot of static holds, there's a lot of similar stuff. But it's been leading more towards very specific training for arm wrestling instead of just wear and tear and going to pin. It's been very strategic. I want to give a lot of prep to Derek Smith, who's kind of, since I've been in California, has kind of taken me under his wing. A lot of the arm wrestling community in itself is just it's just awesome, because you have people that, like, 1 minute you could be getting ready to face them in a super match, and then 360 something days of the year. They're going to be your best friend. They're going to, teach you everything they know. So it's kind of the same camaraderie that you have in powerlifting. You know what I mean? And there's so many different styles you learn. You can really go out there and learn something different from each person versus powerlifting. There's kind of like the same, everybody might have their own take, but kind of the training stuff that's just been kind of passed down.
Yeah, and another thing that Brandon brought up last week too that I kind of wanted to get your opinion on is he was mentioning kind of the difference with the strict curl between like the closer grip versus the wider grip. Maybe elaborate more on that.
Um, yeah, I think it all depends on kind of how you're indoctrinated. And what I mean, and I joke with Brandon, and I hope I'm going to say shots fired because Brandon's probably one of the Brandon probably sells and has more strict curl templates for someone who's never competed than anybody else I know. And I'm saying that in a friendly way. He's a great guy. He understands what it takes, but he started off because here's the thing with strict curl, the traditional bar that a lot of people use is called the OBZ. It's for guys like me and Brandon. We have a similarity that we're both kind of overload and volume junkies. So what that bar does, it's for guys who came up in powerlifting that have become prolific bench pressers or front delt dominant. The pronation and being able to turn your hand all the way over is very, very hard when you get to a straighter bar. Like I'll never do a lot of curl workouts with a just traditional straight bar. And the OBZ, which is kind of more the traditional bar, and I'll get to that where some of the controversy comes in of the style of bars. It's a little bit hard if you're front delt dominant to do a lot of volume on. So I'm a volume guy. So that when I got into it, that right there deterred me from using the traditional bar. And when I knew I wanted to be one of the best, I started to look at, okay, well, what's the lay of the land? And I looked at American strict curl and I looked at the Europeans, and the Europeans just are destroying the Americans for so many reasons. But when I was looking at the bar, they used a really kind of aggressive bar. It wasn't a hammer bar, but it wasn't a traditional bar. So I looked and said, well, what kind of bar is, similar to this? And I found a company, Gopher. I ordered a bar, started curling with it, had a lot of success. I was fortunate enough to, when I started strict curl, there wasn't a whole lot of federations. So it's kind of like, and it still is, it's kind of like the Wild West. So if you can you can almost develop your own federation, adopt bylaws, and as long as you have, your butt and your shoulder against the pad, and I'll get to that, but you can really make your own bylaws. And there isn't like a sanctioned uniform, like in power, you're either going to use a Kabuki or you're going to use a Texas strength. So they were like, fuck it, we'll use this new style bar. And then when other people started curling with it and saw the benefits, now there's like 3 other major federations that adopted that exact bar that I use. And with that being said, when Brandon got into it, Brandon, had traditionally done more of what's called a hammer bar, and it works great. It's great for training because it transitions very well to arm wrestling. So there's different, depending on what your specific use, and there's a lot of sports specificity that goes into curls, and that's a whole nother conversation. So Brandon had finally ordered a Gopher bar, and we're still kind of different because before I would kind of rouse him like, hey, a lot of your curls are great, but you do it on a hammer bar. Let's see what you do on a comp bar. And now that he has the comp bar, he's, believe it or not, I'll give him props because he's one of the guys that's actually strong, extremely strong with an outside grip.
Yeah.
Versus most people when they get on the Gopher, traditionally their strong suit, especially if you're front delt dominated, is going to be inside. So there's room for both. I would argue that traditionally the inside is going to be the way to go. But I have a feeling if Brandon ever crosses over and starts going more inside, or if he goes to competition, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. But, I mean, it's splitting hairs because he's curling like almost 200 plus pounds, which is in American strict curl, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
So huge props to him. He's teaching a lot of people. He's getting people involved, interested in the sport. He finally got the Gopher, and he's at least he's out there doing it. Versus a lot of people when they criticize, and then when they finally get against the wall, they understand what a complex hard lift it really is.
Yeah. So I know CT Fletcher used to have the American record. Maybe go a little bit about what kind of led to you beating that, and maybe his influence to you.
Yeah, that's been a saga in itself. First and foremost, all the props in the world to CT. I don't think Saplankov. I don't think we're talking about short curl in America or around the world if it wasn't for CT. So let me say that first and foremost. I think the controversy came and it wasn't meant to be controversy. I was never I was never not a fan of curls, and I was never not a fan of the OBZ. However, as I stated earlier, my style of overload, and overtraining didn't really coincide well with the shape and some of the difficulties that a lot of curlers have faced. Now, in CT's defense, he's an old school guy, and when he came up, the OBZ was the bar. It was the only bar. So it's kind of like it's almost like I compare it to and not taking anything away from him. It's kind of like you have old school guys say, well, we did this back in the day. It's almost like you had Chuck Taylors, but you're only going to get recognized if you do anything in Chuck Taylor's, although we all know the sport's evolved and now you have Jordans.
Yeah.
So it's not taking away anything from him, but there was a lot of people that felt like Dennis wouldn't have broke his record. I wouldn't have broke the record if we didn't use a different bar. And it's fair enough to say that, but at the same time, the sport has evolved to where almost and here's what you'll see now. None of the major federations in the United States, with the exception of his, and none of the Europeans will ever really go back traditional to the OBZ. But what you're starting to see, and I applaud this, you saw Strict Curl Nation do this, and they're a big East Coast federation. They said, hey, we're going to give him his flowers, and we're going to give people the ability to attempt his record. And I was training at the Arnold. I had an injury, so I had to forego it. But I still, will give them all the credit in the world because they had their traditional, competition, and they held it with the Gopher Bar, which is kind of the American standard. But they also did a flight of just, a crack at the 226. CT's record was 225, so they were giving like the top 4 or 5 athletes the chance to try to beat his bar or beat his record with his bar. With him being, one of the judges. So I thought it was a great thing. I think it's the right thing to do. And I've had a conversation with him with me not being able to attend, the Arnold this year, where I did go over 226, but like I said, it was on a different bar.
Yeah.
I said, hey, I respect you. I respect the hell out of your record. And there's great admiration. And because I wasn't able to make it there and do it in front of him, he is having his world championships in May. So I said, hey, I'm going to train. I'm going to show up. I'm going to, attempt to get this record, at your gym on your bar, in your presence. So, and I think that's definitely the way to do it. So I welcome that. So yeah, even, but it's like anything else. You have, some federations have their standards and their rules. And I've always said this, I'll never are you familiar with like SPF?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'll never knock a guy who does, I don't want to say a touch and go, but if you have a soft handoff, on SPF, I'm not going to knock it. But, the standards in one federation versus WRP or US. So we could argue which is tougher, but
yeah.
I'll never fault, like you look at Mendelssohn's bench record compared to Julius's or Krill's. You can never take anything away from a lifter who had adhered to the standards that would put forth in front of them by the federation.
For sure.
If the federation or the regulation says, this or that, and they adhere to it, then it's a legit lift. What I see is too many people try to move the goalpost. Like there was some controversy because, CT's in his day, one of the rules were you had to keep your head all the way back against the wall, and the other federations haven't really adopted that part. So, and we do that a lot, and I'm sure you see this in powerlifting. You'll see like a USAPL guy will never give a USPA guy credit because like, oh, your head comes off. And I know they just changed the rule, but and that's another reason I never was a big fan of the USAPL because they you have to keep your feet all the way down, your head all the way down, which makes it harder, but it's also not exciting for the fans because you're not seeing the same numbers. So I think you're starting to see more federations streamline stuff, but I would be wary of because so many times people will say, well, this is the standard, and they'll show a video and like, oh, see, he didn't do that. And I got a lot of criticism because I'll be honest, certain people had a way bigger fan base and way bigger, social media. So when you have someone come and say, well, these are the traditional rules and he didn't do this, a lot of people will buy into that. And I'm not knocking. I've had conversations, we've moved past that, but I'm like, hey, that's that federation and this is my federation and here are the bylaws. So if that's why I said, you know what, kind of like the old pumping iron scene when Lou and Arnold are going back, and he's like, "You didn't come in shape," and then Arnold's like, you know what? Fuck it, I'll get stronger too. Well, let's just go compete and see what happens. Because so many people want to see it kind of put to rest,
Yeah.
and it gives me something to prove. So I said, you know what? Fuck it, I'll go do this federation. I'll do it on this bar, and we'll see what happens. And when it happens, don't say nothing to me. Nah, I mean, I'm saying it facetiously because I'm sure it's going to be, whether I do it or don't do it, it's going to be very emotional. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to happen in May. It's kind of what my training's been set around right now, is to break that record on that bar, in at the Mecca, of where it all kind of started.
Yeah, that should be exciting. And it kind of going into more about the people talking about different rules, different federations. Like, I agree with you that, like, obviously you're not going to try to do something extra outside of the bylaws just to appease someone on the internet. Like, you should just be following the rules. And if you get the lift, you get the lift. That's the end of the story. But people always like to talk
Yeah,
shit.
and that's a great take. And that's a whole nother conversation. Like, and it's interesting to me because as a fan of great lifts in the sport, and you see so many people do this, and I feel it's so disingenuous. Like, we're during COVID. I'm not going to knock Thor for doing something awesome and saying, hey, while people have to shelter at home and can't travel to powerlifting meets, I'm going to try to, set this record. And to me, and I'd love to hear your take on it. I think, although you do have home field advantage, I think there's a huge advantage to doing something on the rogue stage in front of 5,000 people versus getting hyped for a lift in your own gym. Because some people are like, oh, you didn't have to travel. He knew, like, at the end of the day, I think any lifter that's used to lifting on a big time stage would much rather have to go set a world record or PR on the stage versus in the confines of their own gym. So I think if you were to ask Thor, would he have rather done it the way he did it or in front of thousands of people? I think he's going to stay in front of thousands of people. But I think too many people were like, well, he didn't do this, he didn't do that. And I'm just like, I think it's just disingenuous. Because I would say that Eddie had the chance to do his at Giants, which is pretty much almost the same thing. It's his backyard. He didn't really have to travel for that. It's not taking anything away from what Eddie did. But I think people are just too up in arms about the wrong things, instead of just saying at the end of the day, we're talking about one of the greatest lifts done by two different people. Why can't it just be that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and my opinion on it too is just like, if it's a lift that would pass in a competition, it should be considered legit, especially with the situation at hand. And like someone like Thor, who's a world class lifter and world class athlete, like you shouldn't be questioning like the legitimacy of his lift just because of the situation we had to deal with at that time.
Yeah, and that leads me to another great point. Or I don't think in the powerlifting world, I don't think people give Julius enough consideration, considering he's never had the luxury of lifting in his own backyard. Every time Julius has set a world record, he's done it in a different state under different conditions that you can, I mean, fucking Wrigley's Field, you know what I mean? And it was like super humid. He had guest appearances all day. He's never been in an ideal situation. He's never been able, like a lot of people have when they set some of these records, they get to sleep in their own bed, eat breakfast at their dining table, then go lift. You know what I mean? So I give that guy all the props in the world because he's done it in like 7 different locations, several different states, none of which have been ideal. And he keeps raising the bar higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, he's an absolute animal. I guess kind of a couple more questions before we wrap things up. Where did you get the nickname the Machine from?
You know what? I was in college and I was studying political science, and everybody always slated me to be. They're like, oh, you know what? You're going to be a mayor or something. You're going to be the mayor. So early on, my handle and people calling me the mayor, and then I took a business marketing class. I was like, this is never going to transition well to anything marketable, and my workout style, I was like, I always wanted to be in the gym, 2 or 3 hours. And I came across, a logo. I always was a huge fan of Transformers and all this stuff. And so I saw this logo that wasn't copyrighted, and it was like literally the same logo I've used for years and years. It was the Terminator slash like a Decepticon. So I was just like, hey, I'm just going to go with the machine. Because one of my marketing teachers said, hey, if you could come up with some kind of gimmick or some kind of action figure and stick it in a McDonald's Happy Meal, would it sell?
Yeah,
So when I said, the mayor versus the machine, or you know what I mean? So the machine, it was ever since.
that's funny. So I guess kind of, I know you said you're going out to compete in May. What else do you have in store? Like, what are some other goals for you this year?
I would, as far as after the strict curl competition, my other goal, to be honest with you, is something that I kind of set out to do when I moved to California and kind of got under the tutelage of Derek Smith, Mega Mike. There's so many great arm wrestlers in California. There's a lot of great arm wrestlers in Texas, but due to traveling, I'm in California consistently throughout the year. So I said I wanted to crack the top 10. So I think I went to a tournament, it was a bigger tournament, was able to have some success. So I think, solidifying it, being one of the top 10 pullers in California and relatively newer to the sport because, there are a lot of top level hands in California, I think is going to be my next goal. I'm really going to set my sights on. So I look forward to that, wrapping that up, within the year.
Awesome. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that. So, my final question for you is if you could give a powerlifter, or I guess in this case, maybe someone going to think about arm wrestling competition, maybe a word of advice, what would that be?
I would say just just start, and don't. I think too many people, whether it's powerlifting, arm wrestling, or anything, people want to sit back and they think they can do so much on their own to get ready to start. I think you just have to get into it. You have to start, and iron sharpens iron. The one thing I've learned about arm wrestling is you're only going to be as good as those around you that are teaching you. So my advice is find great mentors, have a lot of determination, and just really listen to as many people at a high level. And I'm like that with anything. If someone's not in a position you want to be in, then you probably won't seek them out for advice. So I would just pass that along to it, and that's in anything you do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to come on. I really enjoyed our conversation.
All right, thank you so much.